One man dared to ask dangerous questions and paid with his life. Welcome to ancient Athens, the cradle of democracy, where white marble temples gleamed under the Mediterranean sun. But beneath this surface of grandeur and philosophical debate, a storm was brewing. This is the story of a man who didn't write books, didn't hold office, and didn't seek riches, yet he became the most influential thinker in Western history. We are diving into the life and death of Socrates, a man whose commitment to truth was so absolute that he preferred a cup of poison over the silence of a lie. His journey is a testament to the theme, "Dare to ask, dare to die," a philosophy that continues to challenge us to look inward and question everything we think we know about the world. Imagine the bustling agora, where traders and politicians gathered. In their midst stood an unconventional old man, offering no easy answers. Instead, he carried questions that could dismantle an entire empire's ego. He was the gadfly of Athens, stinging the complacent state into awareness and redefining the price of truth. In a city like ancient Athens, image was everything. To understand the impact of Socrates, you first have to picture him. And he wasn't exactly a marble statue come to life. While Athenian society obsessed over physical beauty and athletic grace, Socrates was famously, unattractive. He had a stout frame, a snub nose, and bulging eyes that made him look more like a satyr than a sage. He was often seen wandering barefoot through the bustling marketplace, wearing the same ragged cloak through the heat of summer and the bite of winter. He was poor by choice. He'd walked away from his father's stable stone-cutting business to chase something far more elusive than money. At the time, professional teachers called sophists were making fortunes, charging high fees to teach the elite how to win arguments and gain power. But Socrates, he spoke to anyone for free. He wasn't interested in victory, he was interested in uncovering the truth. Beneath that rough, ugly exterior was a magnetic brilliance that started to pull people in, subtly shaking the very foundations of the city-state before anyone even realized the danger. Socrates' primary tool wasn't the lecture or the sermon, but the simple, persistent question. This revolutionary technique became known as the Socratic method. Picture him wandering through the sun-drenched Athenian marketplace, approaching a high-ranking politician, a famous poet, or a confident craftsman. He wouldn't start an argument. Instead, he would humbly ask them to define a complex concept they claimed to master, concepts like justice, virtue, or courage. At first, they would offer standard textbook answers, but then Socrates would lean in with follow-up questions, systematically peeling back the layers of their logic until they realized their definitions were riddled with contradictions. This rigorous process, called elenchus, wasn't intended to humiliate, but to strip away the fog of false certainty. Socrates famously declared, "I know that I know nothing," believing that the true beginning of wisdom was the recognition of one's own ignorance. By exposing the shallow nature of popular beliefs, he did something radical. He forced his fellow citizens to actually think for themselves, rather than blindly repeating the traditions of their parents or the rhetoric of their leaders. This wasn't just an intellectual exercise, it was a direct challenge to the social order. Why was this self-proclaimed gadfly of Athens considered so dangerous? To the powerful elite, Socrates wasn't just a nuisance, he was a direct threat to the fragile social order. To understand the tension, we have to look at the timing. Athens had recently suffered a devastating defeat in the Peloponnesian War. The city-state was wounded, paranoid, and desperate for stability. The leaders wanted conformity, not a man walking around the agora convincing the next generation that their leaders were intellectually bankrupt. By encouraging the youth to question the traditions of their fathers and the very nature of the gods, Socrates was labeled a corrupter. He wasn't just debating abstract ideas, he was actively questioning the legitimacy of those in power and the cultural norms that served as the glue for Athenian society. His dare to ask was seen as an act of subversion, a spark in a room full of gunpowder that the state could no longer ignore. He proved that once you teach someone to question a tradition, you fundamentally change their relationship with authority. For the Athenian elite, this intellectual rebellion was a crime they could no longer overlook. By 399 BC, the tension in Athens finally reached a breaking point. Socrates was hauled before a massive jury of 501 citizens on two grave charges: impiety against the city's gods and corrupting the youth of Athens. This wasn't just a legal trial, it was a public reckoning. In ancient Athens, defendants were expected to beg for mercy or parade their weeping families to gain sympathy from the crowd. But Socrates refused to play along. In his famous defense, later recorded by his student Plato as the Apology, he didn't backtrack or apologize. Instead, he audaciously claimed he was a divine gift, a gadfly sent by the gods to sting the lazy horse of Athens into a state of wakefulness. He told the jury point-blank that the unexamined life is not worth living, arguing that the pursuit of truth was more important than physical survival. Even with the very real threat of execution hanging over him, he refused to abandon his philosophical mission. Ultimately, the jury found him guilty. It wasn't because he was a criminal, but because he refused to submit to political pressure. He had dared to ask, and now he would be forced to dare to die. After the verdict was delivered, the sentence was final: death by drinking hemlock, a potent and agonizing poison. Socrates was led to a cold prison cell, where he spent his final days not in despair, but in deep conversation with his devoted followers. His wealthy friend, Crito, arrived with a desperate plan. The guards were bribed, the horses were ready, and a life of safety in another city awaited him. "Escape with us," they urged. But Socrates stayed seated. He asked them to consider the nature of justice. He argued that, as a lifelong citizen of Athens, he had accepted the protection and benefits of its laws for 70 years. To break those laws now, simply to save his own skin, would be a betrayal of his entire life's work. If he fled, he would prove his accusers right, that he was indeed a lawbreaker who feared the truth. He believed the integrity of his soul was infinitely more important than the survival of his physical body. He chose to meet his end with the same calm, piercing rationality he had used in the marketplace, proving that the courage to think is inseparable from the courage to die for what is true. As the sun dipped below the Athenian horizon, the final hour arrived. The executioner entered the cell, carrying a simple cup filled with crushed hemlock. While his disciples and friends broke down in tears, Socrates remained the calmest man in the room. He actually scolded them gently, asking why they wept when he was finally about to discover the ultimate truth of what lies beyond this life. He took the cup without a tremor in his hand and drank the poison calmly. To ensure the toxin worked, he walked around the small room until his legs felt heavy and leaden. Then, he lay down for the last time. Even at the very end, his mind was on his duty as a citizen. His final words weren't a grand philosophical lecture, but a humble request to pay a small debt, a rooster for Asclepius. This dare to die was the ultimate validation of his dare to ask. He proved that the search for truth wasn't just an intellectual game, but a conviction worth more than life itself. He died as he lived, questioning, teaching, and seeking the good. One man dared to ask dangerous questions and paid with his life. Meet Socrates, a poor, eccentric, and supposedly ugly old man wandering the streets of ancient Athens. But beneath that humble exterior was a mind that revolutionized human thought. His weapon wasn't a sword, but a question. He famously claimed, "I know that I know nothing." Yet his relentless Socratic method exposed the hollow ignorance of the city's most powerful elites. Why was he dangerous? Because he dared people to think for themselves, challenging the very bedrock of Athenian tradition and leadership. This defiance led him to a prison cell, sentenced to death for corrupting the youth.
Even when offered a chance to escape, he refused, choosing instead to calmly drink the lethal hemlock. He wouldn't trade his integrity for a few more years of silence. Socrates' legacy is a profound reminder. True wisdom requires the courage to be a gadfly, to sting the complacent, and question the dogmas we inherit. Today, his voice echoes louder than ever, calling us to ask the right questions, regardless of the consequences. After all, a life unexamined is not worth living.